11:47 p.m. Wednesday night, you're lying in bed, scrolling through realestate.com.au. Again, you tap a two-bedroom unit in a suburb you've never heard of. Logan, Red Bank, Caboolture. Doesn't matter which. All blur together now, 685,000. You do the math in your head. The same math you've done 18 times this week. 20% deposit, $137,000. You have $46,000 saved. Monthly repayment at 6.2%. Your take-home pay after tax, $4,800. You close the app. 3 minutes later, you open it again. You know that feeling when you check your bank account and instead of feeling dread, you feel nothing? Because the number is fine, the savings are growing, but it still doesn't matter. Because the math doesn't work. Because the houses keep getting further away no matter how much you save. Like when you stop calculating whether you can afford that coffee and start calculating whether you can afford a mortgage in a suburb you'd have to Google just to find on a map. There's a specific moment when you realize you're not just house hunting anymore. You're doing something else. You're opening the app just to have somewhere to put the hope. Just to feel like you're still in the game, even though the game stopped making sense 2 years ago. Here's something that should be mathematically impossible. The Australian housing market just posted some of the lowest transaction volumes since the global financial crisis. Fewer homes are selling right now than at almost any point in 15 years. And in the same breath, median house prices are sitting near all-time highs. Sydney, $1.6 million. Melbourne, $1.1 million. Brisbane, which everyone keeps calling affordable, $890,000. Australian median household income, $83,700 simultaneously. Fewer people buying, prices at the peak. In any normal market, when demand collapses, prices collapse with it. You learned this in year 8, supply and demand, basic economics. And yet here we are, the market isn't crashing, it's frozen, paralyzed. Stuck in a state that shouldn't be able to exist, but somehow does tonopration volumes at decade lows. Prices refusing to fall. And if you're under 40, trying to buy your first property, you're standing on the outside of a system that fundamentally broke and is pretending it didn't. Let me show you 2 people. The first is Jess, 33 years old, registered nurse at a public hospital in Brisbane, makes $81,000 a year, above the national median. Saved $52,000 over 4 years, no credit card debt, credit score 750, did everything right. She cannot afford the median unit in Brisbane, not even close. The math doesn't work, not because she failed. Because the income required to afford that unit is $115,000 and she makes $81,000. The gap is $34,000 per year. That gap is structural. It was baked into the system before she ever started saving. The second is someone who bought in 2020 or 2021, locked in a mortgage at 1.9%. Same income as Jess. Same savings discipline. They just had timing. They bought when money was the cheapest it had ever been in Australian history. And now they're sitting on a financial asset that no longer exists. That interest rate will never come back. The bank will not recreate it. If they sell and buy again, they trade a 2% mortgage for a 6% mortgage, and that swap costs them $1,950 more every single month for 30 years. So they stay. Even if the house is too small, even if they've outgrown the suburb, even if their life has changed and they need to move, the spreadsheet won't let them leave. And that's how you get a market where nobody's selling, nobody can afford to buy, and prices stay high anyway because the few properties that do hit the market get fought over by the only people left who can still play. Investors with equity, corporations with billions, and buyers with help from the bank of mom and dad, which is now the 9th largest lender in Australia. If you've been looking at Australian property prices over the last few years thinking what the actual fuck happened, this video will explain every single domino that fell between 2020 and now, in order with the real numbers, so that by the end you'll understand. It's not you. You didn't fail at adulthood, the system broke. And I'm going to show you exactly how. My name is Levy, and today we're doing something the real estate industry, the mortgage brokers, and most Australian finance media would genuinely prefer we didn't do. We're running the real math. All of it. The parts they don't mention at open houses. The costs that don't show up on the listing. The structural problems that turned homeownership from an expected life milestone into a luxury available primarily to people who already have wealth. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. But at least you'll know what game you're actually playing. Let's get into it. Before we can understand how the market broke, we need to see where it was before everything went sideways. January 2020. Pre-pandemic Australia, Sydney median house price, $1.05 million. Melbourne, $730,000. Brisbane, $530,000. Average Australian salary, $78,000. That meant the median Sydney house was already 13.5 times the median income. Melbourne was 9.4 times. Brisbane was 6.8 times. For context, when your parents bought their first home in the 80s or 90s, that ratio was 3 to 4 times income. They were buying houses for 3 years of salary. By 2020, you needed 13 years of your entire gross income, before tax, before food, before anything, just to buy the median house in Sydney. The market was already expensive. Already tilted against younger Australians, already squeezing people out, but what happened next didn't just make it more expensive. It made it mathematically impossible for most people. And it started with a virus nobody saw coming. Domino 1. The pandemic shocked 2020. The country locks down. Melbourne enters what will become one of the longest lockdowns on the planet. The economy freezes, and the Reserve Bank of Australia does what central banks do when they panic. They slash interest rates and flood the system with cheap money. March 2020, cash rate drops to 0.25%. November 2020, drops again to 0.1%, 1/10%. The lowest in Australian history. By early 2021, you could walk into any major bank and get a home loan for 1.8 to 2.1% fixed for 2 or 3 years. Let me show you what that actually does. Say you earn $85,000 a year. In 2019, at 4.5% interest, you could borrow about $480,000. In 2021, at 1.9%, that same income could borrow $650,000, same job, same salary, same person. You just unlocked an extra $170,000 in borrowing power because the RBA made money cheaper than it had ever been. Now multiply that across every buyer in the market. Every single person could suddenly borrow more, a lot more. People who were priced out at $600,000 could now bid $750,000. People stretching to $850,000 could now go to $1 million. Investors who already own property could leverage equity and go again. This is what cheap money does. It doesn't make houses more affordable. It makes them more expensive because everyone can borrow more at the same time. But that was only half the equation. The other half was that COVID rewired what Australians needed from their homes. Overnight, your apartment wasn't just a place to sleep anymore. It was your office, your gym, your kid's classroom. Your entire world compressed into 60 square meters, that one-bedroom unit in Fitzroy or Surrey Hills or Fortitude Valley that felt fine when you were only there to sleep. It suddenly felt like a sensory deprivation experiment. And millions of Australians started asking a reasonable question. If I can work from anywhere, why am I paying $520 a week to live in a place I actually hate? So they left. Melbourne lost over 50,000 residents. Sydney lost tens of thousands. And they all went somewhere. Brisbane, the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast, Byron Bay, Hobart, Ballarat. Regional NSW places that already had tight housing supply. And suddenly they had a flood of cashed-up buyers with Sydney and Melbourne savings, pre-approvals at 1.9%, and desperation to escape lockdown cities between March 2020 and March 2022, just 2 years. Australian property prices jumped 28% nationally. Sydney went up 18%, Melbourne 13%, but Brisbane went up 40%. The Sunshine Coast, 45%. Hobart, 33%. In some suburbs, homes were selling for $100,000 to $200,000 over asking price. Not in Toorak or Mosman. In Logan. In Ipswich. In Penrith, if you bought in 2020 or early 2021, you made one of the best financial decisions of your life almost entirely by accident. Not because you were smarter. Because you had timing. But if you didn't own property by mid-2021, what happened next made everything catastrophically worse. Domino 2. The rate shock. By early 2022, Australia had a different problem, and it was much worse than COVID. Inflation, all that cheap money the RBA pumped into the system, it worked. Maybe too well, demand roared back. Supply chains collapsed. Petrol hit $2.20 a liter. Groceries were up 8%. Rents spiked because nobody could afford to buy, so everyone was competing for the same rental properties. By mid-2022, inflation hit 7.8%. The highest since 1990, and when inflation runs that hot, central banks have one tool. They raise interest rates. Hard, fast, aggressive. The RBA didn't ease into it. They slammed the brakes May 2022. Cash rate rises from 0.1 to 0.35. June, 0.85. July, 1.35. August, 1.85. September, 2.35. October, 2.6. November, 2.85. By May 2023, the cash rate hit 3.85%. By November 2023, 4.35, 13 rate hikes in 14 months. The fastest tightening cycle in Australian history. And mortgage rates followed. In January 2021, you could get a mortgage for 1.9%. By late 2022, the average variable rate was 5.5 to 6.2%. By mid-2023, some people were paying 6.5 or higher. Let me show you what that does in real dollars. Same house. $800,000 purchase price. 20% deposit. $640,000 loan at 2% interest. Monthly repayment $2,370 at 6.2% interest. Monthly repayment $3,930. That's $1,560 more every single month for 30 years. Over the life of the loan, that's an extra $561,600 in interest. Just because you bought 2 years later, same house, same loan amount. Over $500,000 more in interest. And the people who locked in those 1.9 or 2.1% fixed rates in 2021, their fixed terms are ending right now. In 2024 and 2025, when they roll off their 2% fixed rate onto a 6.2% variable rate, their repayments jump 40 to 60% overnight. $1,500 more per month, same house, same loan. Just suddenly unaffordable, the number of Australians in mortgage stress, spending more than 30% of their income just on housing, doubled between 2022 and 2024. But here's the thing that makes this different from every other property correction in history. Prices didn't crash. In a normal market, when interest rates spike, prices fall. Fewer people can afford to borrow as much, demand drops, prices drop. That's how it works. But in 2022 and 2023, Australian property prices barely moved. Sydney dipped about 8% from peak to trough, then bounced back. Melbourne dropped 6%, then recovered. Brisbane didn't even correct. Just kept climbing. Why? Because the people who needed to sell couldn't sell, and the people who wanted to buy couldn't buy. The market didn't crash. It froze. Domino 3. The lock-in effect right now, about 42% of all Australian mortgages carry an interest rate below 3%. Roughly 18% are below 2.5%. If you bought or refinanced in 2020 or 2021 and locked in at 2.1%, you are holding a financial instrument that no longer exists. The bank will not give you that rate again. The market cannot offer it. It's gone. Here's what that means. Let's say you bought in Sydney in 2021. $900,000 house. 20% deposit. $720,000 loan at 2.1%. Your monthly repayment, $2,730. Now your job changes. You need to move closer to the office, or your family grows and you need another bedroom, or you've just outgrown the suburb, you sell. Today, an equivalent house in the same suburb costs $950,000. You buy it, same deposit ratio. New loan, $760,000, but the interest rate is now 6.2%, your new monthly repayment. $4,680. That's $1,950 more every single month. Every month for 30 years. Over 10 years, that's $234,000 extra. Not principal, not equity, just the cost of moving. So what does a rational person do? They stay in the house that's too small. They stay in the suburb they've outgrown. They stay even though they've had another kid and desperately need another bedroom. They stay even though their job relocated, and now they're commuting 90 minutes each way because the spreadsheet won't let them leave. According to the ABS, the annual property turnover rate in Australia, the percentage of homes that sell each year, has dropped to the lowest level since the 90s. Normally, about 5 to 6% of homes sell each year. Right now, it's sitting at 3.8%. That means approximately 140 to 180,000 properties that would normally be on the market just aren't. They're trapped, held hostage by interest rate differentials. In Sydney, active listings are still 22% below 2019 levels. Melbourne, 18% below. And here's the part that should break your brain. This problem gets worse the longer high rates persist, because every month that passes, more people lock in at 6%. And when rates eventually drop to 4.5, those people will be locked in at 6 and won't want to sell either. The lock-in effect is self-perpetuating. A system eating itself. So you've got a market where sellers don't want to sell because they lose their cheap mortgage. Buyers can't afford to buy because rates are high and prices haven't fallen. Supply is strangled, and prices stay elevated because the few homes that do sell are being fought over by the only people left who can still compete. This isn't a crash. This isn't a boom. This is paralysis. And if you're under 40 trying to break into this market, you're standing outside a game you're not allowed to play. Watching through the glass, let me show you exactly what that looks like. Meet Jess is 33 years old. She works as a registered nurse at a Brisbane public hospital, sometimes ICU, sometimes emergency, always understaffed. She makes $81,000 a year. That's above the national median income. Over the past 4 years, Jess saved $52,000, not because she's wealthy, because she sacrificed. She skipped the Bali trips her friends took every year and posted about on Instagram. She drives a 2014 Mazda 3 with 167,000 kilometers on it and a check engine light she's been ignoring for 8 months. Because the mechanic quoted her $100 to fix it, and she's trying to save for a house. She lived with 2 housemates in West End until she was 31. One who never cleaned the bathroom, one who had screaming arguments with their partner at 1 in the morning. She has no credit card debt. Her credit score through Equifax is 750. By any reasonable standard, Jess is exactly the person the Australian dream was designed for. Educated, employed in an essential service, financially responsible. Here's what the market offers her in return. The median house price in Brisbane is $890,000. Jess isn't dreaming of a house. She just wants a 2-bedroom unit, somewhere she can live alone, maybe get a dog, have friends over without negotiating bathroom schedules with housemates she doesn't actually like anymore, even a unit, a basic 2-bedroom apartment in the outer suburbs, Logan, Redbank Plains. Caboolture is $480,000 to $540,000. Let's run the numbers on a $520,000 unit. Jess has $52,000 saved. She puts down 10%, $52,000. That leaves her with a $468,000 loan. But because she put down less than 20%, she has to pay lender's mortgage insurance, about $16,800. So her actual loan becomes $484,800. At the current rate of 6.2%, her monthly principal and interest repayment is $2,985. But that's not the full cost of ownership. Add council rates, $310 a month. Body corporate fees, because this is Brisbane and everything has body corporate, $420 a month. Building insurance, $145. Maintenance reserve, 1% of the property value annually, $365. Total monthly cost, $4,225. Jess's gross income is $81,000. After tax and super, she takes home about $5,100 per month. Her housing costs would be 82.8% of her take-home pay. She would have $875 left for groceries, petrol, car rego and insurance, phone and internet, health insurance, her HEX debt repayment of $140 a month, and the occasional reminder that she's a human being who sometimes wants to see her friends or buy a birthday present or go to a wedding without having a panic attack about the cost. Jess cannot afford this unit, not because she's irresponsible, not because she didn't save hard enough, not because she made bad choices. The income required to comfortably afford the median unit in Brisbane is about $115,000 to $125,000 per year. Jess makes $81,000. The gap is $34,000 to $44,000 per year. That gap is not a personal failing, it's structural. It was baked into the system before she showed up. And here's what that actually feels like for Jess and hundreds of thousands of Australians exactly like her. It doesn't feel like a crisis. It doesn't feel dramatic. Crises have a beginning and an end. This just feels like how things are now. It feels like opening realestate.com.au for the 23rd time this week and saving property you can't afford just to have somewhere to put the feeling. It feels like your landlord texting you that rent's going up another $40 a week and realizing that just pushed your deposit timeline out another 6 months. It feels like going to your friend's housewarming party, genuinely happy for them, while involuntarily calculating what their mortgage repayments must be and wondering how the hell they did it when you earn more than they do. It feels like doing everything you were told to do. Get an education, work hard, save money, avoid debt, and still being told by every mortgage calculator, every bank, every real estate agent. Sorry. Not good enough. Jess isn't buying a property in 2025. Maybe not in 2026 either. Not unless something fundamental changes. And there are hundreds of thousands of Jesses across Australia right now. Which brings me to the part of the story almost nobody wants to talk about. Honestly, the new players in the market. Here's the uncomfortable truth that gets glossed over in most property conversations. You are not just competing with other individuals anymore. You're competing with corporations, with institutional investors, with superannuation funds that have billions of dollars and see Australian housing as a stable, long-term asset class with reliable yields. According to recent analysis from CoreLogic, industry reports and investigative journalism from the AFR and other outlets, institutional investors and corporate landlords now own approximately 1 in 12 rental properties in Australia. In some new developments, particularly build-to-rent projects in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, corporations own 80 to 100% of the units. Companies like Blackstone, Aware Super, Australian Super, Stockland, Mirvac, Greystar, they're not buying properties to live in. They're not buying to flip in 5 years. They're buying to rent forever. Now let me be very clear about what I'm saying and what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. I'm not saying corporations are evil. What I am saying is there's a very rational, Very legal investment strategy happening that has a very real effect on supply available to people like Jess. When a corporation builds or buys 200 apartments in a single development and holds all of them as long-term rental stock, that's 200 properties that will never be available for Jess to buy. They're not coming to market. They're not being sold to first home buyers. They're being held because the math works for institutional investors. Rental yield of 4 to 5% plus long-term capital growth of 3 to 4% plus tax benefits plus economies of scale equals a better return than many other asset classes. And here's what that does to the market. It reduces the supply available for individual purchase. It increases competition for the remaining properties. It pushes prices higher because there's less available and the same number of individual buyers competing for what's left. It converts homeownership from a wealth-building tool accessible to working Australians into an asset class for people and institutions that already have wealth. In 1991, the Australian homeownership rate was about 71%. Today it's 66% and falling. For Australians under 40, it's dropped from about 60% in the early 2000s to around 45% now. We are watching in real time the transformation of homeownership from a broadly accessible life milestone into a luxury available primarily to people who bought before 2020, people with help from parents, people earning over $120,000 household income, investors using equity from properties they already own, and corporations using institutional capital at scale. This isn't a housing market anymore. It's a wealth extraction system that happens to involve houses. I'm not telling you this to make you furious, though you'd be justified in being furious. I'm telling you this so you understand the game you're actually playing. Because if you don't understand the game, you'll keep blaming yourself for not winning a game that was rigged before you sat down at the table. So what do you actually do? Let's get practical.